On today's episode, we're going to talk about how you can communicate powerfully in your relationship and how you can do so to minimize problems, increase connection, and have more intimacy in any relationship in your life. Welcome to Thriving Launch with Louise Congdon and Kamala Chambers, the show for heart-centered entrepreneurs who want it all.
5 days a week, we bring you different segments to inspire you to live a life of freedom. We interview the leading experts in the field of business, health, and love. Be sure to check out Training Tuesdays, where we give you a clear action plan to grow your own business.
Do you have a product or service that you would like to sell online? Or maybe you've been thinking about it, but you're reserved to do it because you need a website, you need complicated systems, and you need to spend money? Well, I've created a completely free course that teaches you how to use Facebook in a purely organic way. This means no ads and no money are needed. You can use Facebook completely free. So head on over to thrivinglaunch.com. Opt into my Profit from Social Media course. I'm going to teach you the free methods to using Facebook to make money today. Today's guest is Marty Babits, counselor and therapist who has worked with hundreds of families and couples over the past 25 years. Today, Marty joins us to talk about his book, Three-Dimensional Communication, and the 3 different levels of communication. Marty's also the co-director of FACTS Family and Couples Treatment Service in Manhattan, and he is here to join us to talk about how we can have better communication in all of our relationships. Welcome. Now, if you've been tuning in, you've heard some of our interviews with Don Miguel Ruiz, Dr. Harville Hendricks. Today, we want to dive into for me, it's like the beginning of intimacy is about communication. I mean, intimacy itself is a form of communication. Mm-hmm. So we've brought on Marty Babits, who's written a book called I'm Not a Mind Reader, Using the Power of Three-Dimensional Communication for a Better Relationship. Now, what I like about the beginning of that title is I'm not a mind reader. So important in relationships, and yet don't we just do this even on accident sometimes, Kamala, like where we want the other person just to know what we're thinking?
Yeah, well, I'm feeling tense right now, so you should just know that I need your attention.
Right. So Marty, welcome to the show. Let's just dive in. Yeah. The title itself says three-dimensional, and one thing I understand from the work that you've done and your research is that there's 3 different levels of communication. So let's start diving in. What are those 3 levels, and then let's dig deeper.
Yeah, sure. The 3 dimensions are this very superficial. The first one is very superficial. It's just what people say to each other and the literal meaning of what goes back and forth between people. The second dimension is the emotional subtext. So it's the feeling behind the words. And a lot of the work I do has to do with bringing out the feeling behind the words. The third dimension is the deepest, most profound. It's the dimension of mindfulness, and it's a dimension in which you take stock of what's going on the more superficial levels. What do the words mean? What are the feelings? And can you make a decision about how to use what's being communicated to move towards creating emotional safety? So right there you get a dynamic where your awareness is pushing you towards figuring out what will create emotional safety. And that becomes your mantra. And it's not like a trick formula. It's more like a practice, like a meditation practice would be. Will you tune into your breath to calm yourself? Will you tune into thinking about what's going to create emotional safety? And that means what's going to help me promote being mindful. If I'm angry, for example, and I'm feeling like I want to blame my partner for making me angry, can I take a minute to think, if I attack them, am I moving the relationship in the direction I want it to go? So direction is a big part of what I think about and what I try to help couples take hold of and move with. So it's another piece of that connected is building hope. Because a lot of couples come in for couples therapy and they feel stuck. They feel like they can't move. And they want to communicate. They want to connect emotionally, sexually, even to be able to make plans together. They're just not getting along. And the word that they often use when they come in the first session is, we're not communicating. But they don't have a feel for what that really means. Like, what is communication? So that's how I came up with this idea. I wanted something as simple as 1, 2, 3 that could be explained easily.
That's really great. Kamala, you had something?
Yeah, I just think that's such a beautiful, simple, masterful way to break it down. This whole first level of the literal meaning behind what people are saying, the emotional subtext, and then to really come in with the observer, with this mindfulness where we can actually observe what's happening within ourselves and within the other person.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it also, it puts an emphasis on something that I speak about a lot in couples therapy, which is couples argue, couples fight. But the research says it isn't the arguments or the fights that are crucial. It's how you repair. So it's how you pick yourself up after you've been knocked down. It's how you try to heal a mistake if you've made one. And the method is geared to help you look at things that way. So you're not trying to be perfect, because nobody can be, but you're trying to be connected. You're making a commitment to think about what you're feeling, think about what your partner's feeling, and think about putting the two together. So if people can start to do that, they can really do a lot of work. It takes a long time for that to catch. It's like I have a lot of ideas that front load the work, because if they get those beginning ideas and can move with them, they can have traction in their relationship. And if they don't get these very basic ideas, they're going to be spinning their wheels. And I'm going to be listening to the same fight over and over again, different versions of the same thing.
Do you have any recommendations on how to start this process of listening on these 3 levels?
Sure. My examples come from my therapy practice. They come from my life as well. I was in couples therapy when I was, say, 30 years ago, before I really knew much about couples therapy. And it taught me that there was a lot about myself and about thinking about relationships I didn't know. So it opened me up to my blind spots, right? So people come in, and if they're coming in for therapy, if we're talking about that, I want to make them feel safe to explore evaluating what they need to know, what they need to learn. That's an answer in terms of therapy. In terms of everyday life, you can take any example of an interchange and work through the 3 dimensions to lead towards compassion rather than conflict. It's another way of looking at it. It's like it draws you towards a compassionate view of what's going on, compassionate to yourself and your partner.
I love that piece that you said about it's not really about the problem, it's your ability to repair. And that's something that Kamala and I had really witnessed when we were in the class with Harville Hendricks. Do you remember that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that Harville said was, it's about how quickly we repair. And that was a big breakthrough for us because we do have disagreements, and working in the field of intimacy and relationships, it's we put a little extra pressure on ourselves sometimes.
Sure.
The emphasis is on the repair, which is very freeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I use meditation as a metaphor to explain it sometimes. The idea is if you're doing a meditative practice and your mind floats away, that doesn't mean you're not doing the practice. That's part of the whole exercise. Mm-hmm. And part of it is bringing yourself back. Part of being in love with somebody is also, nourishing the relationship, nourishing yourself, being able to be flexible, focus your attention in different places at different times, but come back to your priorities and work through difficulties. Show the commitment to connection.
So how do we get better? Because the thing about a lot of people is that we communicate with our heads and we're looking at what's being said, even though we're more moved by emotion, right? So we're moved and put in motion by our feelings.
Absolutely.
But listening from that space, really, like, sometimes I'll listen to Kamala and she'll say something and I'll feel irritated by what she said instead of hearing her feelings and saying, I heard you say that and I could tell that you were feeling upset, or it seems that something is bothering you, and learning how to cultivate that skill set where I'm not listening at that first dimension, but that second dimension, and then moving to that third dimension of having her feel safety begins with that second level. How do we get better at that?
You get better by practicing it, by practicing being compassionate towards yourself, by demonstrating a commitment to tuning your partner in so they know when you are off. Like, for example, if you're harsh, like if, let's say, partners are talking and one of them has this is taken from a recent situation. One of them has they have a bad case of a skin rash, right? So they share it with their partner. Their partner says, "Oh, that's really too bad. I wish there was something I could do about it, but it'll get better." Okay, so flash forward 15 minutes, and the guy who said, "I wish there was something I could do about it, sorry you feel that way," he's exhausted. It's been a long day. He falls asleep, right? It's, late at night. His partner comes in the room and wakes him and says, I feel like crying. I'm so upset because not only does I feel like I look terrible with this rash, but it hurts. And he says, "Is it contagious?" Right? You see where this is going, right? Okay. Now, did he really mean that? Did he really mean, in other words, that he doesn't care about it as long as he's not going to get it? Is that what their relationship is about? Not really. They love each other. So they've got to hold on to, okay, she's got to have it in her head. She's catching him at his worst. She doesn't want to freeze him there, right? And she can say, "Gee, I'm disappointed. I wanted some empathy. And I'm taken aback by the way you're responding." They can talk about it, in other words. He can reflect on what he's done and say, "Hey, yeah, that was harsh." She can also see his point of view, which is, "I was exhausted and you woke me and I have trouble sleeping." You know what I mean? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So there's two sides to everything, and things can get very complicated. But when you do something, when you say something that's harsh, when you are triggered, and that's something I want to talk a little bit about, is learning to be sophisticated about what you're like when you are triggered. Mm-hmm. And if you can put up with a kind of 90-second neuroscience lesson, I'll tell you what I mean. Is that okay?
Love it.
Yeah? Okay. All right. So evolution-wise, we actually have 3 brains in our head, right? It's the guy who came up with this concept got a Nobel Prize. It's called a triune brain, 3 parts. The lower brain stem, that is what we could call it informally the snake brain, the brain stem. It just has to do with involuntary responses, heartbeat, respiration, that kind of thing. Things you don't think about or make choices about, things that just happen. That's the most primitive cranial function. The middle brain is often called the emotional brain, or the brain within the brain. It's also called the tiger brain or the mammalian brain. It's much more developed than the lower brain, but you still can't think with it. You can only respond. You can fight or flight. That's where the fight or flight thing comes from. If it's triggered, which what you're talking about, Lewis, is being triggered, mm-hmm. right? If you're triggered, it means that middle brain has signaled the situation is dangerous. And what happens is we've evolved to such a point that the rest of the brain, that third part of the brain, the most advanced, newest evolutionary development in the brain, the cerebral cortex. That part of the brain is 80% of the brain. But when the emotional brain, the middle brain, is activated, the cortex is deactivated. So you're losing a lot of decision-making power. You can be aware of what you're feeling, but you can't make decisions about how you're feeling. You react. That's what the middle brain is, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to be fair to yourself. Once you kind of get the idea of how these things work, if you're triggered, the best you can do is notice you're triggered and say, honey, I'm right now, I'm triggered. If I say something, it's probably going to take us in a direction we don't want to go, and I'm not going to feel good about it. I need to slow down. That's what I need right now. So I call that like a substitute response. Like instead of just blurting out something like what this guy said, is it contagious, right? You would say, I don't know what to say right now. I don't want to say something I don't mean. Okay? So you're asking for like tips. How do you handle this situation? It's like you anticipate that these things happen, because they do happen. And then you anticipate also that sometimes you're going to slip and say something you really regret, and you're going to respond to it hopefully quicker and quicker. The idea is at some point you might extinguish the anger response, because you're so used to thinking, hey, I don't want to do that. That's not what's going to make me feel good or make the relationship feel good. So it's a matter of working with it over time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. It's good for people to get this, because sometimes people will see me in classes and we're demonstrating how to do the emotional sensitivity or how to listen from the heart-centered space. And they're like, oh man, I'm never going to get that. But what I've discovered is that really the key to it is trying, because, as much as I know Kamala, I'm wrong many, many times, if not most of the times, about what she's feeling. The thing is that once she knows that I'm in that state of wanting to feel or to feel into what she's going through and understand her, she gives me the answers. It's not rocket science, and if I try, it's almost dummy-proof,
Yeah, it's not rocket science, but it involves a certain kind of humanizing coordination that can be subtle. Like I hear that you guys really work together. And that's a beautiful thing. And I love what you said about the heart space. I love that phrase. On the back cover of my book, there's a phrase, it's a title of a chapter. The title is, I can't read your mind, but I need to know your heart. Because that's the key. I need to know you in your vulnerability. I need our relationship to be safe enough so that even though it may not come out directly all the time, we eventually get down to what's really going on. We eventually, in other words, really get to know each other. And that's how we really can love each other and give each other give our full selves to each other and explore. Explore feeling that life is an adventure and you're in it together. It's like I also, just to take a sec to go in this direction, it's almost a cliche to say that love is like making music. I used to play in bands, so I used to think about this kind of thing. The idea is that when people hear musicians play, it becomes a kind of a template for communicating, because they know that good musicians listen to each other, and they leave spaces for each other, and they anticipate each other's movements, and they try not to get in each other's way, right? They try to really bolster each other, so that the emotional tone of the piece comes through. And what a lot of people don't realize is when you're listening to music, it's like you can close your eyes and just be nourished. But in order to make that music and make it happen that way, takes a lot of work, concentration, and focus on the musician's part. It takes intentionality, it takes dedication, it takes passion, it takes thoughtfulness. So you want something to feel natural and organic, but you also want to kind of have humility in the face of how wonderfully complex it is, and how that's why love is so rich. That's why human development is so interesting. So many strands.
I wanted to back up for a moment, too,
Sure.
because what a lot of people don't know is that when the research done by Dr. John and Julie Gottman, which is my background and where I come from, and Dr. John and Julie Gottman found that 69% of problems are perpetual problems, 31% of problems are ones that have solutions. And really what that means is that a majority of issues that couples are having are not ones that we have a direct solution to. You know, like for example, something about Kamala is she's very focused, she's very detail orientated, and that is an incredible skill set that she has. It's something that I deeply admire. Me, on the other hand, I'm more kind of like childlike and kind of goof off, and constantly I'm very whimsical, like, oh, this idea sounds cool, and I'm a dreamer, and sometimes that frustrates both of us because I come with this wild idea and I'm so jazzed, like a kid like kicking down the door and going, ooh, I got this idea, and Kamala's like, oh god, this idea just sounds like so much work, you know, because she sees the methods, she sees the plan. And sometimes we have issues around that. And the truth be told is this isn't an issue that's ever going to go away, because Kamala, her gift is her ability to see the methods. And my downfall is my ability to not see that. Vice versa, my gift is that I can dream very fearlessly and freely. And, you know, vice versa, her downfall is that she can get kind of wrapped up in details. And so we'll have issues around it. And what Dr. John and Julie Gottman say, and this is where it's really helpful for us, is that it's not so much resolving the problem, it's understanding that this is what Kamala needs from me, is like sometimes for me to slow down, or for me to kind of mull over my dreams before I just come and like throw 100 ideas at her, and then she gets a headache, and you know, and then I get frustrated because I feel like my dream just got knocked down. And so it's there's a certain kind of complementary to the problem. Do you get what I'm saying, babe?
Yeah, it's definitely, there's the dance, you know, and every couple is going to have a dynamic like this in their own form.
Sure.
And
absolutely.
I'd love to hear a little bit more from you, Marty, about the methods, these 3 communication opportunities that we have that you've been talking about, these dimensions.
Sure.
And how can we apply these dimensions to something like that?
Yeah, well, I think that Luis was really talking about that kind of, I love Gottman's work. I probably mention him more than anybody else in my book, in terms of other people that I've relied on, because he's done so much great couples research. And when you look at that statistic, 69% of what couples do together basically has to just be accepted because it's not going to change. And then the other 31% you can work with. Well, it doesn't mean the 69% is like a hopeless mess. It really doesn't mean that. What it means is acceptance is a profound dynamic in relationships. And understanding what your different styles are is part of a deep, loving acceptance. And the 2 styles that you just described, I can certainly understand how they would create problems at times, but I also can understand how they would complement each other. And if you draw the strengths out of both of those styles, you can really move with that, and you can inspire each other.
And we do, you know, that's, I think that those 2 traits that we have make us very successful as a combination. So, you know, I think that that's the same thing with all couples, is those, it may not be the same dynamic, but whatever it is that you're struggling with within your partner, there's this opportunity to actually, that might be the very gold in your relationship. Yes,
I agree. And so in terms of the 3 dimensions, what we're talking about now is the 3rd dimension of it. It's understanding what Luis may say something that may knock you off balance. And if you listen to the words, you may misinterpret the 2nd dimension by thinking he's saying this in order to knock me off my balance, or he's saying it, he's inconsiderate of how I'm feeling. He's posing a challenge that is unnecessary. You may feel that way. But you also, if you're thinking about it in 3rd dimension and opening up possibilities, you also may say, hey, maybe he is trying to make a contribution and he's got to get all this stuff out. And maybe he's open to us picking and choosing which of these ideas is the best. And maybe we're going to come up with a creative breakthrough, and I'll help him shape it. Because an idea that is a great idea but isn't organized is hard to communicate, and communicating a great idea is crucial, right? So that's how I put it on the three-dimensional spectrum. You know, it's like there's a conflict. You can see a conflict in the first dimension if you're saying one thing, and if Luis is saying he has all these great ideas, and you say, hey, yeah, they're great ideas, but slow down. And if you say that with anger, if in a way attempting to shut him down, that's one kind of dynamic. But if you say, hey, hold on, slow down, let me catch up with you, or catch my breath, or let me think about what you're saying. In other words, you're extending goodwill to him. You're allowing the benefit of the doubt that his style is not geared to be difficult to you. It's his genuine style, right?
I think appreciation goes a long way as well in the relationships. Is just being able to appreciate this is that person's gift. You know, I can see that Luis's dreamer, whimsical nature, if I just appreciate it and look for ways how to support it, real miracles happen.
Which you really do.
It's incredible when I don't fight against it. And I think that we all have this incredible gift inside of us. And if we can help our partners bring it out with our appreciation and support, amazing things can happen.
You know, we did an interview with Ariel Ford, who's the sister of Debbie Ford. And Ariel Ford wrote a book that I just really enjoyed. It was, you know, the idea and the premise was just great. And it was a book on wabi-sabi, which is an ancient Japanese art. And essentially what wabi-sabi is, in a nutshell, is taking problems and flipping them on its head and seeing how you can be appreciative of the problems. And Ariel gave an example. You know, she's been married for like 20 plus years. And one of the things that she kind of didn't like about her husband, and it was something that she explored while she was writing this book, is that he leaves like coffee mugs. You know, that she just find throughout the house. He just sets them down and little things like that. And she said, how can I flip this upside down? And so then she flipped it, was like, wow, I'm really appreciative that now when I look around the house, those coffee mugs remind me that I have someone that loves me and that I get to be in a wonderful relationship. And that totally flipped the problem. Now those cups are a reminder of gratitude. It's not like, oh God, I got to pick up after the slob. It's, oh, I'm glad that he's here. I'm so glad that, you know, like, see, I mean, that if somebody passed away, I would miss that coffee mug. I'd be like, you know, I kind of miss seeing that person's coffee mug around, and they're gone, you know?
Yeah. I know exactly. That's a great example. It's like sometimes untidiness can be a sign of liveliness.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
You know, spontaneity.
I'm going to use that one next time I don't feel like cleaning.
Hey, well
let me
you're the cleaner in our house.
But it's worth trying.
This is all great information, Marty. And now, if people want to grab your book or find out more about you, where should they go?
Well, my website is www.martybabits.com, MartyBabits.com.
And all of that is on the show notes, but it's good for people to hear it right now. MartyBabits.com. And then go ahead and continue. Like, where do we find your book? Because this communication piece is stuff that takes time. And one of our guests said this communication stuff isn't the most sexy. It doesn't sound sexy, but when we're researchers like yourself and myself, it actually is the most sexy thing out there, is the communication.
Yeah, you know, and it also is, it's like, to me, it organizes and sets the stage for creativity. And creativity is sexy, and it opens you up to possibilities. And it can be applied to any dimension or arena of the relationship, including the sexual part. Like when you're talking about validation, connection, warmth, generosity, love, and how those fit into communication, you also are making a bridge to talking about sexuality. because I think sexuality gets left behind a lot. And I agree with you that most people, when they hear communication, they don't think it's the sexiest thing around, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's true. And it doesn't. With speaking to like therapists and stuff, they say it's the stuff that if they title their courses like communication, it doesn't tend to get a lot of attendance. So the therapists, as far as the marketing goes, have had to get more creative around that. But then they, as soon as people are in the class, they're like, okay, let's talk about communication.
Yeah, and if you really can teach something about it and people come away feeling they understand something more than they did before, then it feels good. But I imagine it can feel dry sometimes, but it doesn't have to be.
Well, it certainly hasn't been dry talking with you, and
it's been really fun.
I so appreciate how you've broken down these 3 dimensions of communication. Also, we've talked about some really great resources today, other shows that we have had, the Gottmans on an interview, Ariel Ford, Harville Hendricks. Anything else before we sign out?
Just to say it's been a pleasure. It's lovely talking to you both.
Thank you, Marty.
And I really feel I have a very good, warm vibe from your relationship, which is nice to be, it's nice to be in contact with.
Thank you. Yeah, you have a very warm vibe just talking. I started feeling more relaxed because it's a little wound up today. So thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Thriving Launch podcast. For books and resources related to today's episode, make sure to head over to thrivinglaunch.com. We'll see you there.
Be sure to tune into our next episode, where you'll get the chance to meet Kamala Chambers and learn more about who the co-host of Thriving